Now, it's been an eventful few weeks with hostilities between Iran and Israel. Those hostilities which saw a US strike on Iranian nuclear sites and a reciprocal attack by Iran on US military interests in the region have now come to an end following on from a ceasefire deal that was brokered by President Trump. Well, one person who's taken a close interest in Iranian affairs is John Bolton, former US ambassador to the UN and a former national security advisor to President Trump. Ambassador Bolton, thank you very much indeed for joining us from Washington, D.C. I'd like to start by asking you, what's your understanding of what's been achieved during these last 2 weeks with regards to curbing Iran's nuclear ambitions?
Well, I think the combined effect of the Israeli and U.S. strikes has been to set the program back very considerably. There's a lot of debate in Washington today about the extent of that. But, Rafael Grossi, the Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, referred to enormous damage. I'm willing to take that. We'll find out more later. But it's a significant setback. It doesn't eliminate the program. It certainly doesn't eliminate the regime in Tehran. That's the real source of the problem. But I think this is a good start, at least.
A good start, but not obliterated. I'm not hearing you use that kind of language.
No, I don't think the evidence is there for that. As I say, we'll certainly learn more. I think Grossi's words really are a pretty good assessment at this point. The real question is, does the regime try to recreate the program? We already have indications that they've had some sites they've concealed from the International Atomic Energy Agency. No surprise there. And perhaps other activities. So I think we have to keep a very close watch on it, because the threat of Iran's possession of nuclear weapons is not just a problem for Israel. It's a global threat of nuclear proliferation.
You were calling for strikes on Iran a very long time ago. Does all of this feel a bit like a vindication?
Well, unfortunately, if it had been done 20 years ago, it would have been easier and far less risky, and we wouldn't be at the brink of having a nuclear power based in Tehran. I think the world's got a lot of serious crises going on right now. The war in Ukraine, threats from China in the East and South China Sea, and obviously the incredibly difficult situation in the Middle East precipitated by the Hamas attack on Israel on October the 7th, 2023. So the real trouble here, I think, the source of it is Iran under this regime. I don't think there's a chance for lasting peace and security in the region until that regime is overthrown.
Given that this was a once in a generation sort of level of hostilities, in fact, the greatest hostilities we've ever seen between Iran and Israel and the United States, I mean, and you say this is a good start. Does that mean you think Israel and the United States should have gone further?
I think much more could have been done. I think it was a mistake to stop the attacks. It would have been one thing to pause them so that the battle damage assessments, as they call them, could have been refined, and we could have had a better idea, perhaps also how Iran was responding. Were they moving uranium or equipment around? Could we verify additional sites that we had not yet known? But also, I think the strikes were very destabilizing against the regime itself. We'll now wait to see if the people of Iran, who I think are very dissatisfied, we'll see if they try and take matters into their own hands here. You've seen a real decimation of the top Iranian military and Revolutionary Guard leadership. I think the regime is a lot more fragile than it appears from the outside.
Yeah, you've alluded twice already in this conversation to regime change in Iran, and President Trump has sounded rather opposed to that. Why do you think that is?
It's a mystery to me. He was opposed to it in the first term as well. Now, today, there are reports in Washington that we're offering to finance a commercial nuclear power project in Iran, which I think is madness. The regime's on its back, and this is not the time to throw them a lifeline.
Okay, and there's talk now of another Iran nuclear deal being struck. Do you think a deal should be struck with the leadership that's there in Tehran?
The only deal to strike is how to remove the nuclear capacity that they now have. When we dismantled the Libyan nuclear weapons program in 2004, We packed a lot of it up and took it to Oak Ridge, Tennessee, where it currently resides. There's still space at Oak Ridge for the Iranian nuclear weapons program. That's worth negotiating. But any possession of these nuclear capabilities by this regime, I think, would just risk getting us right back into the dangerous situation we've been in now for so many years.
It's been a very busy few days. We had President Trump ordering the strikes on Iran last weekend. Iran responded 2 days later. Then President Trump brokered a ceasefire. Hasn't it all been rather hasty, in your opinion?
Well, I think it has been, and I think it shows that although Trump did make the difficult decision to strike, that it wasn't part of a larger strategy. And I think that's always dangerous, because if you get into a circumstance and you don't know how it could play out or what your options are and your path to a successful conclusion, you're at risk. I think the Iranian response has been defiant. That could be pre-programmed. They're still probably assessing how badly they've been damaged. But as I say, when they're pressed like this, when they've seen their terrorist proxies around the Middle East decimated, we've seen the fall of the Assad regime in Syria, which hopefully leads to a government that is not a friend of the Iranian government. Things are moving here in a very favorable direction. And if the regime itself is in as much trouble as I think and hope that it is, there's no reason to give it a hand up.
Do you see Iran doing something else after those attacks on the military base here in the Middle East? Do you see that as a likely scenario?
Well, it would be important to watch. Will they try to resurrect the nuclear weapons program? Will they try to, again, resume substantial assistance to Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis? Do they have that capability? I suspect militarily they're in very, very difficult shape, and a lot of the top leadership has been eliminated. This is when regimes start to fragment at the top, with the supreme leader who's in his mid-80s and not well, and no clear succession path. I think they're in a very tricky position inside Iran, and that's where the people's pressure against the regime could really make a difference.
How likely do you see regime changes being?
Well, I don't know that it's necessarily going to come tomorrow, but the Ayatollah Khamenei is only Iran's second supreme leader since the revolution of 1979. So it's not like they've got a well-ordered constitutional process to pick a successor. And I think that's the moment when you could really see the top officials in the military, the Revolutionary Guard, and even among the Ayatollahs, you could see real fractionation of the leadership, and that's when it could begin to collapse.
Given that this issue of Iranian affairs, the Iranian nuclear program, is an issue so close to you and your career path and things you've been saying over the years, did the Trump administration reach out to you at all with regard to this?
Well, let me put it this way. I spoke to certain people in the administration. I wouldn't want to reveal their names for fear of damaging their careers with the White House. But look, I think there was a very broad consensus, certainly within the Republican Party, that striking the nuclear program was the right thing to do. Again, not just simply because of Israel, but because of the proliferation threat that Iran posed around the world.
Now, you were present, just moving on to the NATO summit last week at The Hague. You were present at the July 2018 NATO summit, at which President Trump lambasted alliance members for not spending enough. He's just got them to commit to 5% of GDP spend on defense. Do you think this NATO summit at The Hague is going to go down as having been a success?
Well, I think making the commitment is a success, although in 2014, when they made the 2% of GDP commitment, that wasn't carried through 10 years later, which was the goal. So we'll see what happens. I think it's a step that's necessary in a very dangerous and challenging world. But making the commitment is easy. Following through on it is the difficult part.
Does that summit and the unanimity we saw, this sort of the sense of harmony, does that send out a message, do you think, to the wider world, in particular to hostile powers?
Well, I certainly hope so. I mean, we still have a hot war in Ukraine because of the Russian aggression. I'm sure that China has watched very carefully what happened in the Middle East this week and watched the NATO summit. And by and large, I think they should be far more cautious in their behavior in light of this week.
Just lastly, a new label for President Trump emerged at that summit during his exchange with the NATO Secretary General, Daddy. What do you think of that?
Well, fortunately, that wasn't an American assertion that came from the Secretary General of NATO. I'm sure that'll go down as a meme in social media history, but that's not really how I think most people in the U.S. view their role in the world.
You don't look at President Trump as being a father figure.
For goodness sakes, no.
Perhaps not for the rest of the NATO alliance members either. You don't think he looks at them as sort of perhaps being, in a childhood sort of setting, in a brawl setting. That seems to be what Mark Rutte was getting at.
Right. Well, maybe he does, but I don't think the rest of us do. I think they're adults too.
All right. Well, thank you very much indeed for sharing that with us, Ambassador John Bolton. A pleasure talking to you.
Glad to be with you.
Well, the 12-day war between Iran and Israel began on the 13th of June when Israel launched a bombing campaign. Well, Tehran then responded with ballistic missile attacks on Israeli cities. Well, it was the most intense and destructive confrontation between the two countries to date. And exactly 1 week ago, a ceasefire deal was brokered by the United States, which ended that war. But Iran is now saying it has little faith in Israel's commitment to that truce. Well, let's get more. We can speak to Mick Mulroy, former US Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East. Mick, thank you very much indeed for joining us from Montana. Always a pleasure having you on the program. At the beginning of the show, we heard from President Trump, and he says he's not offering Iran anything. He says the US isn't actually talking to Iran right now. Why do you think he's saying that?
Good to be with you, Tom. I think it's part of this negotiation process that the U.S. believes it's changed somewhat after the war, the 12-day war you just referenced, and the U.S. strikes on their nuclear facilities, essentially changing the dynamics, and that the U.S., if they go ahead with negotiations to get to a new nuclear agreement, feels it's in a better position and has added more requirements, if you will, from their position for that agreement to be reached.
Okay, just before we cross to you, we were speaking to John Bolton, former US National Security Advisor, and we were talking about how President Trump has once again been saying, the Iranian nuclear facilities have been, quote, obliterated. I'm wondering if you're as sure as President Trump is about that.
So that certainly isn't a term that the military uses when it comes to conducting battle damage assessments. It's generally degraded or destroyed. Destroyed would be the closest, I imagine, to obliterated. But the way battle damage assessments work, especially something as significant as these strikes, is as more information comes over time, when people start being sloppy and talking on phones, for example, or human assets can get into places, it changes. So right now, just based on the modeling, the strikes probably caused significant damage to the infrastructure. Obviously, the centrifuges that couldn't be moved, particularly in Natanz and Fordow, were likely destroyed or at least significantly damaged. The question really is, where is the highly enriched uranium? Was it in the facility or was it moved? And if it was moved, where is it? So this is a two-part to the intelligence community task. One is to keep determining just how effective these strikes were. And if they weren't effective, that needs to be said. It's not a political issue. It's a intelligence and military issue. And then, of course, if this enriched uranium was moved, where is it? Because Israel and the United States still controls the airspace, and they can still take strikes. So that also indicates that this is not quite over, especially if Iran pulls out of the non-proliferation treaty and potentially stops participating with the IAEA. These are indicators that Iran might be going toward a nuclear weapon, particularly if we can't find this highly enriched uranium.
So, Mick, just to clarify, you seem to be saying that to use words like obliterated, or let's use the more official word destroyed or degraded, we don't quite have enough evidence, do we, to make statements that are quite as decisive as that?
Correct. And I think we've seen a few members of the intelligence community in the United States. There's 18 different agencies weigh in, but with very preliminary information. And often the earliest information is not accurate. So we will find out over time Whether it will be disclosed to the public, I don't know. But certainly it will be briefed to the key committees, the Intelligence Committee, the Armed Services Committee, and the Foreign Policy Committees in the House and Senate. And then they'll have to make a determination of whether it was significant enough to set back their program years, or they need to act again. And I think the important part is act again. This doesn't indicate that it's completely over. And if Iran is going toward getting a nuclear weapon, then the strikes will likely occur again, certainly from the Israeli side. But I think even President Trump made it clear that he would hesitate to strike again if that was the case.
Yeah, we've heard from the UN nuclear watchdog chief, Rafael Grossi, saying Iran would probably be able to begin producing enriched uranium again in a matter of months. So he doesn't seem to think it's all been so much of a setback for the Iranians, all this.
And that's a good point. That's another data point for people to consider. I would only ask if I was questioning that assessment is, and that includes the fact that Israel can continue to strike facilities that are being rebuilt or new facilities that are being built. I think that is a factor that doesn't seem to be coming into play when making this assessment. But ultimately, the intelligence community should be the ones making assessments. Political assessments are largely done for political reasons. And it's more important that we know the actual facts so we can make the best determination on how to go forward. And hopefully, of course, this ends with another diplomatic effort and a path toward a nuclear agreement, which is in the interest of all countries involved, including especially Iran.
What's the US position, do you think, on regime change? Because, you know, we got slightly mixed message on this particular issue over the last 2 weeks or so. What's your assessment?
I believe ultimately the US would be against trying to force a regime change. If it happened organically, which it doesn't look like it's going to, the regime spends most of its effort trying to remain in power, and they have pretty much locked down the country. But I don't think the U.S. Wants to see what would happen if there was a regime change, such as taking out the supreme leader, Khomeini. He's already appointed someone to take his place. That person is likely in step with him, if not even more a hardliner. And the IRGC hardliners, of course, are going to be pushing, as they have been for a while, for them to acquire nuclear weapons so they wouldn't have this attack. They can see they're not conventionally militarily capable of fighting Israel, let alone the United States. So I think there was a big concern of instability, internal civil war, which would not be good for the region, particularly if it was an act by either the United States or Israel that caused it.
Right, so you're saying the US position is leave the leadership to their own devices, let them get through this on their own, and they're not going to try to hasten the departure of the leadership. But do you think the leadership will survive?
It's hard to tell. I mean, oftentimes, even as unpopular as this regime is, and they are in Iran, even as they do almost everything to promote their own longevity, but not the goodwill, or if you will, the interests of the Iranian people, because getting sanctions relief would be a huge benefit to the Iranian people. They have the ability to stay in power by brute force. That's how they do it. And so if they can continue to do that, the only thing that I could see, and this is just analysis and speculation, is if there's even more hardliners that believe the supreme leader has not been an effective leader, that tries to replace him, but probably with somebody as hardline as him, or even more so. So that's something that would be internal. But I think from President Trump's original statement, and now continuing to say that he kept Khomeini from being targeted, that indicates to me that the U.S. believes that that targeting would not be in its own interest.
Well, turning our attention now to Gaza, where there are no signs of a let-up in the violence. At least 58 people are reported to have been killed today. That's the latest information we've got. This happened in Israeli strikes. This as Israeli tanks pushed into the eastern suburbs of Gaza City, shelling several areas. While Israeli aircraft bombed at least 4 schools, this after ordering hundreds of families sheltering inside to leave. Well, residents have described this latest bombardment as some of the worst in weeks. Meanwhile, in the southwest of Gaza, there was deadly gunfire at the Nasser hospital, which is in Khan Yunis. Meanwhile, the US President Donald Trump is once again calling for an end to the 20-month-old war in Gaza. On Sunday, President Trump wrote on his Truth social media platform, "Make the deal in Gaza, get the hostages back," he wrote. Well, as part of the latest diplomatic push for an end to the fighting in Gaza, Israel's Strategic Affairs Minister Ron Dermer is holding talks at the White House with a view to discussing next steps. Meanwhile, in Israel itself, 2/3 of people, according to one poll, say they want the war in Gaza to come to an end. And during the course of the weekend, people took to the streets in Tel Aviv demanding a ceasefire. Meanwhile, in the UK, the BBC has apologised today for not cutting off their live stream of the Glastonbury Music Festival, where a British band made anti-Israel remarks. Well, the band in question, called Bob Vylan, is accused of leading the crowds with chants of "death to the IDF," referring to the Israeli military. While the British Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer has added his voice to the debate, saying that there was no excuse for what he called appalling hate speech. Well, Prime Minister Starmer also expressed his opposition to the Irish rap trio called Kneecap, who also performed at the Glastonbury Music Festival. Well, the band, whose members have also been highly critical of Israel and its military campaign in Gaza, led chants of Free Palestine at that festival. Well, for more, we can cross to Birmingham in the United Kingdom. We can speak to the Palestinian academic and analyst, Professor Kamal Hawash. Professor Hawash, always a pleasure talking to you. I'd just like to start by asking you, just set the scene for our viewers. How much of a front-page news story is this in the UK?
Well, I mean, I first heard about it last night, the evening of when it happened, and I've been following the developments. It's on all the newspapers, front page, TV stations, radio, and so on, which concerns me because it has become, in a way, a distraction from what is happening on the ground, which is the continuing genocide that Israel is carrying out in Palestine, in Gaza. I've seen scenes this morning that are absolutely horrendous of children, women, men being brought to what remains of the medical system to treat them. So for this, I don't know what this artist was thinking. Obviously, we can't get inside his head, but the way it has sort of come out, both in terms of what he said and the question about the coverage by the BBC, will distract from what Israel is doing, which is a continuation of the most horrendous crimes of this century.
Yeah, okay, so we got these two sets of artists. One's a duo, one's a trio. One's called Bob Vylan, the other's called Kneecap. I mean, would you say that those sorts of artists are helpful or unhelpful to the Palestinian cause, given that they have detracted, as you said, from some of the realities of that cause?
I mean, first of all, there is no doubt that the support for the Palestinian people, as the pictures come out of Gaza over the past 650 or so days, people have found to be absolutely horrendous and shocking. And the fact that this is happening in this century, with our governments remaining silent, has shocked people. So it's got into all sectors, including the arts sector. People judge what they want to say and do. They don't consult the Palestinian people about it. Just like this particular slogan, if you want, that Vylan decided to say, I don't think he tried to understand its impact, what it could be, and maybe he thought it would be interpreted one way, but it's been interpreted in a very different way, particularly playing into the hands of the Israelis. I've heard a number of spokesmen today who will turn it into Jew hatred and anti-Semitism and so on. So it's difficult to know how they come to do what they do. Only one person had the microphone, and that was him, and he came out with that. But it does show that Israel is being seen as an atrocious criminal terrorist state that's carrying out a Holocaust. They look to their governments and they see that they're not doing enough. The killing in Gaza continue. So some of them take that into their own hands through whichever platform they have.
Would you say, though, that these two sets of artists went beyond the lines of what's acceptable for artists expressing their opinions?
I think Israel has gone beyond the line, the red lines of all sorts of things. Because let's be clear, this guy shouted the slogan. He didn't attack or conduct violence against anyone. Israel is killing people, human beings, children, women, starving them, depriving them of the most basic necessities. That's the extremism. If there are any lines, Israel has left no red lines that it didn't cross. So the question of why an individual has done what they've done is up to them. We each try to do what we can in this context to support the Palestinian people, and that he decided, in a 30-second sort of period to come up with this this phrase. Now, what I do not know, because we're not inside his head, and I don't want to defend him, but did he mean it is targeted at ending the IDF as an organization, as a criminal entity that commits war crimes, whose soldiers have gone into Palestinian homes and ransacked them, worn women's clothes, sat there with a button, pressed it to say, this house destruction is for my wife or for my daughter? Really? So if that's the institution he's talking about, I think most people are absolutely appalled with this institution. I don't think he was targeting, but again, I can't get inside his head and confirm this, that he was targeting the killing of any individual. Okay. But those who commit crimes should face accountability. And the accountability should come from their own countries. If there are British people, dual citizenship of Israel, who go and commit war crimes and come back to the UK, they must be held accountable according to British law.
Okay, but Professor, I mean, if, however, they didn't mean what you were saying, they weren't calling for the death of an institution, but they're calling for the deaths of Israeli soldiers, would you accept that calling for the deaths of people is hate speech, as the British Prime Minister has said it is?
Well, he takes everything out of context. It's because he wants to defend Israel. That's what Keir Starmer is doing, and others. I've heard a lot of this. Again, we don't know what was inside his head when he said this and what he really meant. But he didn't call for the killing of civilians. If what he was saying was directed at criminals wearing a uniform, going into Palestinian areas and attacking and killing the Palestinian people, and I say if, I don't know what was inside his head, but I'm not going to therefore take a stand and say what he said was wrong, because I don't know what he intended in his own head.
Okay. Some artists will be very nervous now to express their opinions about what's happening in Gaza. Do you see that as being a real risk, that given that people will be accused of anti-Semitism for saying something against Israel, in this case what's been labelled as hate speech, that's going to detract from the goals of the Palestinian cause? Is that a concern you have?
Well, I mean, look, even those who didn't come out with a phrase like that, who've been on Palestinian marches, artists, actors, actresses, musicians, etc., have feared the fact that they would be targeted. And even though they have not said anything like that phrase, they have been labeled anti-Semitic simply for being in a speaking at a demonstration where there was a shout for free Palestine, or Palestine will be free from the river to the sea. So they've been accused of being anti-Semitic, not for their words, but just being present to show solidarity with the people who are under so much oppression. So, but I think we're getting to a point where Israel has crossed every line, and that people feel, so be it. I will speak with the articulation that I can, whatever field they are in, to show my support for the Palestinian people, to say to our government, you're not doing enough You are not doing enough. Why are you selling weapons to Israel and continuing to do that? Why are you flying planes out of Cyprus to provide the Israelis with intelligence? Israel is committing war crimes on a daily basis. It is committed to ethnic cleansing the Palestinians. So that's what people see. So the accusation of being anti-Semitic, well, they have absolutely, the Israelis have emptied anti-Semitism of the seriousness that it has in it, which is what I learned when I first came to the UK, or soon after. Anti-Semitism is the hatred of Jews because they are Jews. What Israel has tried to do is to make any criticism of Israel to be anti-Semitic, to say that Israel was created as a racist entity, anti-Semitic. They have tried to close the space for any criticism. And even when the Palestinians have gone to the International Criminal Court, they've called that legal terrorism. When they've called for boycotts, they've said that is economic terrorism. So that is what everyone is really angry about. This state feels it can do whatever it likes, and unfortunately is doing whatever it likes, like attacking Iran, a country that didn't do anything to it. So people are really angry. And therefore, it is first of all and foremost the fault of Netanyahu and his government and the state of Israel for committing the crimes that they do. But secondly, for the so-called allies who still support Israel and have come out in big numbers today to condemn what happened at Glastonbury, rather than say, we're not going to go and make that interview with the television about that. We would go and talk about what Israel is doing to the Palestinians, because that has got to stop for humanity's sake.
And Professor, as an academic in the UK, and obviously you get asked about, the issues in the Palestinian territories all the time, I expect. Do you find yourself having to be extra careful and having to make yourself extremely clear? Because you yourself must be targeted and accused of anti-Semitism on a regular basis, I'd imagine, aren't you?
Not all the time, but the point that I would make is the following. I live in a democratic country. I know the limits of what we are able to say or do, and I remain within them. But that the issue of hate speech, the issue of anti-Semitism, I will not accept Israel defining or the pro-Israel lobby defining what that is. For example, everyone knows, there are also people who claim that from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free is an anti-Semitic phrase because it calls for the destruction of Israel. No, it doesn't. It calls for the end of this regime that is oppressing the Palestinian people and the end of the occupation. And by the way, Palestinians live all over that land, and they have different color cards for that. But the other thing about from the river to the sea, none of them asked the Likud party to cancel it, to strike it out of their charter. So that's what their charter says. But nobody has asked the Likud party to cross that out, because they genuinely believe that that is their land, but it isn't. It is the Palestinian people's land that had Israel foisted on it.
There was a lot of applause during the Glastonbury Festival when those artists came on stage and said the things they said. What do you read into that?
Well, there's no doubt that, first of all, people went to enjoy themselves at a music festival. How they behave, is down to them. There are, in terms of the pictures we saw, there's a huge amount of support for Palestine because of what Israel is doing. And therefore, when they see artists, standing with the Palestinian people, and again, let's detach that from the particular phrase, because that's what they want. The Israelis want everyone to focus on that rather than on the atrocities that they are committing. So when these are famous artists who play really good music for the audience that was there. So people were applauding them, one, for the music that they play, and secondly, for the support for the Palestinians. Now, you can read into this what you want as to whether they were supporting the particular slogan or not.
Okay, and Professor, I mean, as an academic in the UK, and you've explained to us, you know how to navigate the lines of what's sayable and what is unsayable in the UK and in other countries as well. What would be your advice to artists who want to express their opinions about what's happening in Gaza and in other parts of the Palestinian territories, but without crossing those red lines?
I think it is important that they are in touch with the solidarity movement here, the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, and so on, and watching what is happening and taking advice in that way. But also, they are as I am in a democratic country. You need to be careful about what you say, but you mustn't be intimidated and therefore, pushed away to say nothing. If you want to write a song supporting Palestine, write a song. If you want to make a film about what's happening in the Palestinian territories, and as we saw, the BBC stopped documentaries being broadcast for the wrong reasons. A child who was talking about what it was like for children in Gaza, the program about him was pulled simply because his father was a member of Hamas. Well, watch the video, criticize it, debate it. But so I think they should continue to support the Palestinian people in their own way. Clearly, the problem isn't with the Jewish people here in the UK. The problem is with the country that is called Israel, that claims to represent the Jews, and therefore it claims that the atrocities it is committing are in the name of Jews. They are not. They are in the name of the people who order them and commit them, and that is the Israeli government and the IDF.
Okay, and just lastly, the police are on the case with regards to what happened at Glastonbury. In your opinion, were any crimes committed at Glastonbury in this regard?
I can't answer that. It is very much for the courts to determine this. So I will watch like everyone else to see which clause of a particular law that they will bring to say that the crimes were committed. But I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not able really to offer you an answer on that.
Okay, well, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed. Really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. Professor Kamal Hawash, thank you very much indeed for your time. Well, let's get more analysis, and we can speak now to Lord Wolney, who joins us from London. Lord Wolney is the former UK government advisor on extremism and political violence. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. The BBC's apologised, particularly for its handling of the live stream of the Glastonbury Music Festival. What's your view on how they've handled all of this?
This has been an appalling dereliction of duty from the BBC. They could clearly see this problem coming, because the question of whether the band Kneecap were going to play, and if they did, what the BBC's attitude towards it had been going on for weeks. So it's truly extraordinary that they didn't have the systems or the judgment in place to pull the feed from this band Bob Villain as soon as the totally unacceptable, potentially criminal incitement comments started to be made.
Okay, so you're saying they should have stopped their live stream, and of course there have been lots of complaints over this coverage of that event. The media watchdog Ofcom in the UK says it's very concerned. It says that the BBC has questions to answer. Do you think heads should be rolling at the BBC?
I think you've got to. They have got to ask. Tim Davie, the Director General, has got to ask his team how on earth this was able to happen. And if he is not satisfied and ultimately cannot satisfy Ofcom and others that there is proper systems and proper levels of judgment in place, then yes, people are clearly going to have to go. And I have to say that this falls squarely in the lap of the Director General himself, and eyes are on him now to show that he can get a grip of this crisis. And if he doesn't, then he is going to face calls to step down himself.
The police are on the case in the UK. In your opinion, and I think you've sort of alluded to this already, but was a crime committed?
Now, I think it's clearly arguable that what the comments that were made were Absolutely, they were anti-Semitic, and there's a strong case that they were inciting violence. If this man was urging death to the IDF, that is the defense force of the world's one Jewish nation. You are obliged to serve in that defense force as an Israeli. And so there is a strong case to say that that was inciting violence against Jews. And I'm sure that is what the police are looking at carefully now, and I hope that they will come to a view on that without being swayed by noises off who are time and again trying to give excuses and get-outs for extreme performers like this.
Lord Walney, just before we crossed you, we spoke to a Palestinian academic who's based in the UK, Professor Kamal Hawash. His interpretation, he said there could be a different interpretation here. This was his theory, not mine, but I'd like to get your opinion on it. He said that death to the IDF was essentially, potentially, a call for the disbanding of an institution in Israel rather than an overt call for people to be killed or for people to die. Do you buy that?
No, I don't, and I'm not even sure really if he would, if he were being brutally frank with himself and you. And look, this was not a comment that was made in isolation, and you put it next to this man's raging about the fact that he had to deal with a music executive who was in his words, Zionist, by which I think he clearly means Jew. Oh, shock horror that you had to do that. And then he finishes with the phrase "from the river to the sea," which is a constant source of debate and controversy, but is, I think, clearly in this context, does include the violent eradication of all Jewish people from the state of Israel. So these comments were completely across the line. Let's see where the police end up. But I'm afraid that both the festival organisers at Glastonbury and the BBC are culpable for having enabled this permissive environment by not taking a sufficiently firm stand against the band Kneecap, who were playing directly after these guys, who are facing one of whose members is facing a serious terrorism charge, and I've had to apologise for saying on stage, kill your MP, kill your member of parliament.
One of the things our earlier guest also said to us was that for him as a Palestinian, what was truly disgusting, and he didn't approve of the slogans and the things that were chanted on the stage at Glastonbury, but he said was even worse, was the deaths of 56,000 plus people in Gaza, many of them civilians, and the images he sees every day of emaciated children in Gaza. How would you reply to that?
Yeah, the situation in Gaza at the moment is intolerable for many Gazans. There has been a systematic disinformation campaign from the terrorist group Hamas, and I think it is highly questionable or reprehensible in some cases to take at face value the images that they have attempted to put into the Western media and the figures. But it is an appalling situation in Gaza. We want the conflict to end. We also have to remember that one way of ending this conflict immediately is for Hamas to release the civilian hostages that they have held for coming up to not far off 2 years now. That is an appalling crime against humanity. It is totally inexcusable, and they are still holding on to many individuals and refusing to tell for others, the families, that those hostages have already died. So they hold the key to stopping this conflict, and I hope even now that their backers in the region will make clear to them that they have to act now to stop this.
I don't know if you watched the Glastonbury Music Festival. I have to confess I didn't see the whole segment in its entirety, but it seems that some of those slogans chanted by the various performers there were met with applause. Does that worry you?
Yeah, absolutely. Applause. People were repeating the calls of death to the IDF. And that shows why it is so important to take a firm line against the people's legitimate strong views and desire to protest tripping over into hate speech and incitement to violence. Because I understand the argument which says, okay, we're now discussing this and we're projecting these bans and giving them more publicity than they ever would have had otherwise. But the alternative is just to turn to a blind eye to this and allow a radicalization of this debate where it becomes acceptable at a music festival to chant for the death of individuals. It's totally not acceptable, and we need to be clearer, I think, in this country where that boundary is between legitimate protest and unacceptable criminal action.
And I put this question to my earlier guest as well, our Palestinian academic guest that we were just mentioning. I asked him what's his advice to artists that want to speak out on this issue of what's happening to civilians in Gaza and the Palestinians in general. And I asked him what he thinks the red lines are, where people can express their opinions but remain within the realm of what's acceptable. What's your opinion?
My opinion is it's not rocket science. If you take the view that this is the fault of Israel, it's not a perspective that I share, while maintaining real reservations and concerns about some of the things the Israeli government is doing. But if you take that view, then say it. But say it without demonizing the Jewish people, without calling for the death of Jews, without suggesting that in some way Israel is a uniquely evil or a demonic entity, and all of the ancient slurs against the Jewish people that have been going on for millennia, which are now being reheated and rehashed in the form of criticizing the state of Israel, like that makes it okay. There are so many conflicts in the world. I'm sad to say there are so many conflicts in which Muslims are being killed or persecuted, but time and again, it is only Israel and a highly slanted view of what Israel is doing, which captures people's attention.
Yeah, but I mean, speaking to you from the Middle East, I mean, it's hard to think of another place in the world right now where 2 million people are unable to get access to food because another government has decided to cut off access. And when they do access it, sometimes they get shot at, it would appear. I mean, there aren't any other, I can't think of another case like that in the world. Can you?
The assertion that there is no food in Gaza is one that has been actively propagated by Hamas, and they have ramped up that assertion when it was becoming clear that people were trying to circumvent the route to get aid, which they had been partially propping up their own war effort. But you talk about where else are Muslims being persecuted in large numbers. Look at what has happened for many years now to Uyghur Muslims in China. But the Chinese are not the recipients of the ire of Muslims in the UK and elsewhere. Now, I understand people's concerns, of course, and share them for injustices within Palestine, but it is not a coincidence that it is where this involves the world's only Jewish state, which has never been accepted by many in the Middle East, that this constantly receives disproportionate levels of attention, and we need to understand that, and we need to call it out.
Okay, well, I'd love to talk to you for longer about this, but we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for your time, Lord Welney, former UK government advisor on extremism and political violence. Thanks for your time. That is all we have time for on today's edition of Global News Today. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Be sure to join us again tomorrow for more exclusive interviews. Until then, bye-bye.